Hey guys, so today we're doing 5 betting out of position, and this will end the basic part of the preflops uh, guide for 6max cash games. And yeah, from now on, the videos will be post-flop poker at a basic level, or some more advanced videos to do with pre-flop and post-flop play. So yeah, in this video, we're going to be mainly talking about, well, I've done examples for small blind versus button, cutoff, and middle position, but yeah, we're mainly going to be talking about the small blind because the small blind 3 bets more than the big blind. So primarily you'll be 3 betting, 3 betting and 5 betting as the small blind. People don't really 4-bet bluff against the big blind, so yeah, like if you're ever gonna face a more balanced 4-bet bluff range by an in-position player, it's going to be when you're in the small blind. So what I've laid out in this notepad is that if you're in a readless situation where your opponent doesn't know you and you don't know your opponent, the original raiser is going to perceive the 3-bet out of position as being pretty strong. So if we imagine, for example, the cutoff versus our small blind, if we 3-bet the small blind, he's probably readless. He's probably gonna anticipate a range like this. Like he's gonna expect it to be very strong, maybe even narrower. If the game is quite soft and weak. So, if we're playing 50 zoom and lower, he might even be expecting a range like this. This is what I would immediately think if I was playing 25 zoom, or 16 zoom. Some of these stronger hands, which should be 3-bet, but are not, are just called, and it's just, I think it's a mistake. But so yeah, the first thing is they're gonna assume the 3-bet's quite strong if you have no reads. So when they do 4-bet against this range, it's gonna be a very tight and strong range. So yeah, until you have a read that your opponent is getting out of line, or your heads-up display is showing that they have some really wide stats, I would recommend folding a lot versus a 4-bet. So yeah, if I 3-bet my small blind and I face the 4-bet, like quite a small 4-bet, I would just expect it to be kings plus, cutoff versus small blind. So yeah, so I would just generally fold like pretty much everything. I wouldn't fold these hands, but I wouldn't jam them. And yeah, I would advise you to do the same. So, and then when we do have kings plus, I think kings plus I generally just autopilot jam small blind versus cutoff. But if you do jam these hands, these combinations, and you get a fold, then I would definitely note it down, because that player, if they're willing to 4-bet bluff readless, they're probably going to be 4-bet bluffing a bit too much. So definitely bear that in mind, and yeah, just be aware of that. So yeah, these are kind of the default stack off ranges that people use at the micros and low stakes. So from the button, it's going to be, I mean, this won't be news to you really. Ace king and queens plus with like maybe half of jacks. Jacks as a stack off on the button is pretty rare, but it can sometimes happen. That's all I'm going to say. In the cutoff, like people with ace king and pocket queens, raise calling ace king and queens in the cutoff is fairly, I think I would say it's more standard, but maybe versus the small blind, I put it in brackets because I've associated about half frequency with it. So it's going to be sometimes called and sometimes raise called off, maybe even raise folded sometimes, but yeah, they're not always going to brainlessly stack off with these hands. They're going to call in position and take a flop, especially at the micros. So yeah, definitely bear that in mind. And then in middle position, some people just always 4-bet pocket kings, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to just call with kings. And yeah, ace king and pocket queens are definitely calls versus out of position 3-bets. So yeah, you can never, when you're out of position facing a 4-bet, you can't just jam these hands. You can jam ace king as a total bluff with good blockers, But jamming queens is usually a mistake unless you're expecting to get a lot of folds, because the blockers are terrible, and against the calling range of aces and sometimes kings, you're completely toast. So yeah, this is so I'd recommend 3-bet calling queens, if you 3-bet calling, maybe even folding if you think their range only has that and no bluffs. But even if they have some ace king, it's worth calling, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, I made a note here. It kind of makes sense to range chop when you're out of position because you have a positional disadvantage for when you're playing post-flop poker. And then yeah, on top of that, if you range chop and you sometimes get a fold, then that's a success for you. Because when you do get called, you're going to be chopping, and when you get a fold, you win 24 big blinds or however big their 4-bet was, which is obviously nice. So yeah, this is assuming we don't have any 5-bet bluffs, but yeah, we can come on to that later. So yeah, we might anticipate as a small blind 3-betting and 5-betting these hands versus the cut off these hands, kings plus and some of ace king and queens, and versus middle position, re-raising aces until all in, and sometimes stacking off kings, sometimes not. Yep. So yeah, the small blind versus the button. This is the first time I'm talking about a hand which wasn't in the range, but ace queen suited will become our next best bluff after ace king, simply because pocket queens is a stack off, and yeah, we block aces, ace king, and pocket queens with ace queen suited. So yeah, if you're ever thinking of 5-betting wide, ace queen suited is your hand, then obviously ace queen off would be the next best hand as well after that one. So yeah, like having a jack is slightly less relevant since jacks aren't often a 4-bet call off. Yeah, and then small blind versus cutoff. Yeah, we're planning on range chopping with pocket kings and better, and then sometimes 3-bet calling ace king and pocket queens and stacking off some of the time. And yeah, in this situation, the next best bluff, well, the next best bluff used to be ace queen suited, but the best bluff in this situation, because we're only targeting kings plus as a stack off range, we need to block both. We need to use both cards. Having ace queen as a bluff here would be rubbish because the queen doesn't block anything. We only have one blocker basically. So ace king is the only bluff we have. So any jam here, this is a total bluff with ace king. Just remember that it's never a value jam. Yeah. So yeah, in the same way I mentioned earlier, pocket queens as a 5-bet jam is significantly worse than ace king, because ace king you're trying to get a fold primarily, or fold out chop, or sometimes chop, but whenever you get called you're going to lose. The good thing about ace king is that you block a lot of kings plus. The bad thing about pocket queens is that you unblock kings plus. You're going to run into the big pocket pairs all the time, and we're only sometimes going to be flipping against ace king. So pocket queens, it's not a value jam and it's a terrible bluff, so think about 3-bet calling queens out of position. And yeah, then we have this kind of tricky situation where calling 4-bets out of position is face up, and you can be exploited if you don't have kings plus in that range. So yeah, you're going to be losing to the 4-bet range, which has no bluffs in. If the range is kings plus, you're just going to auto lose to it. So what you can do is you can entertain the idea of having kings plus in you can call 4-bets out of position with kings plus and pocket queens and ace king, and then you can call one and fold with queens and ace king if you haven't improved, and then you're still unexploitable on the turn and river, and you can chop. You'll lose some, but you won't lose your whole stack, which is a bit better. Yeah, I mean, this isn't fixed in theory. This is just my opinion. It's something to think about. I personally just I mainly in the past did a lot of 5-bet jamming with my strong range because that's just what I knew and what I did. But yeah, in future I think I'm going to be doing some more post-flop play, and happier to slow play. And if my opponent does have more bluffs or any bluffs, then it forces him to play perfectly post flop, otherwise I'm gonna win, assuming I play well. So yeah. So yeah, I just made these like if then statements. I think these are I've been doing this quite a lot with designing strategies, and it's a good way of like articulating what's going on and why, like what the scenario is, what the variables are, and then what our counter to the situation is. So if they never 4-bet bluff, then we should just fold the ton versus their 4-bets and just continue with hands which are better than their range. If we don't think we can, we're at a stack depth where we can call and outplay their range, which is going to be pretty hard to do, 100 big blinds deep versus a 4-bet. So yeah, folding a lot is fine. If they sometimes 4-bet bluff, then I would advocate for 5-bet jamming for a range chop and sometimes getting a fold. That would be good. And you can think about calling out of position and playing some post-flop poker. If they often 4-bet bluff, then we can start 5-bet bluffing a lot more. Jam all of our value hands, sometimes get called by an even wider range, which is good. And yeah, we can think about slow playing again out of position, and make our player in position like struggle with a polarized 4-bet range. So if we just have a look at if the guy is 4-betting the button like way too much with a lot of like offsuit aces, because like ace 10 to ace queen are calls, I'm pretty happy to call. This guy might be getting super out of line with like hands like this. If you start calling a lot out of position, he can only be sort of strong on like ace high boards. So yeah, like 3-bet calling out of position with medium pairs can start doing some damage to him. And when an ace does come, and if you have like your ace kings here, for example, pocket aces, then you can do some damage to him. So yeah, it's worth considering slow playing out of position and inducing post-flop mistakes from the opponent. But yeah, that's player dependent. Depends if he's willing, if he makes mistakes post-flop, and if you play really well post-flop as well. So yeah, lots of moving parts. If you're not really comfortable playing post-flop, then yeah, stick to the 5-betting for a range chop strategy. But yeah, there's no rule book saying, there's no one saying you have to always fast bet aces. I think it's good to spread a bit of aces everywhere. So yeah, I hope you learned something. Maybe you'll be willing to try something out that you haven't done before, whether it's 5-bet bluff and a combination you've never 5-bet bluff before, or slow play a monster out of position, and maybe you lose the hand, maybe you lose to some sort of king 9 suited bluff, but maybe you'll learn something and improve from it. So yeah, this is the end of the pre-flop, the basics of pre-flop, and yeah, we'll get on to some post-flop stuff soon. So I'll see you in the next one.